The case of Whitney Hustler. Dayton is a city in Montgomery County, Ohio, United States, with a population of over 137,000. On July 27th of this year, Whitney Hustler was born into a dog family of two sisters. However, their parents' marriage was in trouble. 2 years after Whitney was born, tensions between her parents led to their separation. Due to the mother's health problems, full custody was given to the father, resulting in little contact with her growing up. Whitney was a cheerful and sociable girl. She had a strong creative instinct and loved to draw. Recognizing her talent, her father sent her to art school to hone her skills. Whitney's creativity was evident in all aspects of her life. As an adult, she loved to experiment with makeup and fashion, and even brought her creativity to home renovations. When Whitney was 12, her mother, Kimberly, improved and decided to move back in with her family. By then, Whitney's older sister, Chelsea, had grown up, got a job, and moved out of her father's house. Whitney, the youngest daughter, continued to live with her father. Kimberly wanted her daughters to live with her. However, reconnecting with Chelsea was difficult because she had her own life and did not feel the need for her mother's presence. But Whitney was interested in the idea of communicating with her mother. They began to see each other, went out, and became close. Eventually, Whitney moved in with her. For the next few years, she lived with her mother and continued to communicate with her father. At age 15, while in high school, Whitney met a boy named Randy Ryder. They were attracted to each other and gradually developed a romantic relationship. The relationship lasted for several years before Whitney introduced Randy to her parents and attended a family dinner at Ryder's. Their relationship was strong and they became inseparable. They finished school together, started working, and made plans to attend college. In 2017, Whitney discovered she was pregnant at the age of 22. Although the pregnancy was unplanned, the couple and their families took the news positively. The couple's parents were supportive, seeing the birth of their child as an opportunity to complete their family. Randy's parents, who were recently retired and had a lot of free time, offered to help the couple with childcare. Since Whitney and Randy needed to pursue their education and build their lives, they happily accepted Randy's parents' offer. The couple soon moved to St. Paris, a small town in Ohio with less than 2,000 residents, where Randy's family lived. For the first few months after moving in, while Whitney was pregnant, they lived in a one-room apartment and worked. After their daughter was born, they decided to move into Randy's parents. This move made their lives significantly easier, allowing them to balance school and work more effectively. It was also financially beneficial, as they did not have to spend a large portion of their income on rent. In addition, the grandparents were able to spend more time with their granddaughter. In addition to Randy's parents, his younger brother lived there as well. They all lived together as a large family. The friendly family supported each other, and everything seemed perfect. A quick note before we continue. As you know, on Uncover Eyes, we release new videos every other day. Many of you have reached out expressing a desire for daily content, so we've launched a new channel, also focused on real-life crime stories, called Secret Crime Mysteries. On the days we don't post videos on Uncover Eyes, we'll be uploading them on Secret Crime Mysteries. This means if you're looking for daily doses of astonishing real-life crime cases, don't hesitate to subscribe. Without further ado, let's dive into today's case. On October 1st, 2020, Randy visited the police station to report his Whitney disappearance. He stated that the last time he saw her was on the evening of September 30th, following an argument between them. After the fight, he went out to meet friends. The conflict continued with his mother, Valerie, but Randy did not stay to see how it resolved. He explained that he and Whitney had planned to spend the evening together, but she decided to stay home. A few hours later, his friends were supposed to pick her up in a car to go have fun together. Randy admitted that at the appointed time, his friend came for Whitney. However, she was not waiting in the driveway as they had agreed. The friend called her several times, but Whitney ignored the calls. He waited for her in the car near the house for some time, but then concluded that perhaps someone else had picked her up or her plans had changed. So he did not waste time and went to the party where he expected to meet her. When Randy arrived at the party, Whitney had not shown up, which worried him. He tried calling her several times, but she did not answer. Randy contacted his parents, who were home. They told him that Whitney had left shortly after him getting into a car with a friend. Randy's mother, Valerie, saw an unfamiliar car pull into the driveway and watched Whitney get into the car. However, she could not tell who was in the car or how many people were inside because the windows were tinted. Whitney stopped communicating after that and was never seen again. Randy waited another day, hoping she would be with friends. Randy tried to find out who Whitney had left with, but eventually decided to contact the police for assistance. Initially, the police were skeptical of Randy, as people close to the victim are often considered in such cases. However, Randy's story was supported by his parents and friends. Randy's parents saw him leave for the party without Whitney, and he stayed there until his mother told him that Whitney had left on her own. His mother corroborated Randy's story, verifying that he had been at the party when Whitney disappeared. The police contacted Whitney's mother to gather more information about her whereabouts. Whitney's mother insisted that Whitney wouldn't just run away, as she was a responsible mother devoted to her child and wouldn't leave for long. With this information, the case didn't seem to be a simple disappearance, leading the police to begin a search for Whitney. Then, a man noticed something unusual while hiking in the woods near Kaiser Lake in Ohio. At the bottom of a cliff, he saw a person lying face down. Thinking it might be a tourist who had fallen, he tried calling out to them but got no response. He decided not to risk climbing down the cliff and instead contacted emergency services. Emergency responders arrived quickly and used specialized equipment to descend the steep cliff. When they got to the victim, it was clear that she was dead. The victim was a young woman, and responders immediately noticed signs of strangulation on her neck and face. This ruled out a fall as a cause of death. Unfortunately, the victim had no identification on her. Police had to rely on her clothing and other identifying features, such as earrings, to try to identify her. The police reviewed recent missing person reports and quickly found a match. A forensic expert had identified the victim as Whitney. The forensic investigation confirmed that Whitney died from strangulation. Police began to investigate the circumstances surrounding her death. After examining the last hours of her life, they found that she had been in contact with her Randy, his father Rodney Sr., his mother Valerie, and younger brother Rodney Jr., who all lived in the same house. The police went to the Randy family's house but only found Randy's brother there. Rodney Jr. told them that his parents had taken their granddaughter and gone hunting. The police decided to talk to Rodney Jr. first. It was discovered that Rodney Jr. had been at work from early in the morning until late at night on the day Whitney went missing. This was confirmed by his coworkers and surveillance camera footage. When he returned home, Whitney had been dead for several hours, so Rodney Jr. was quickly eliminated as a suspect. Randy, he had been at a party during the time Whitney went missing and was not considered a suspect. However, many questions remained for Randy's parents. Randy's mother, Valerie, was the only witness to see the girl leave the house and get into an unknown car after their son left. But no one else saw this. Randy's parents returned home 6 hours later, covered in mud. They claimed they had gone deer hunting in the woods, although there was considerable doubt about this. Valerie was able to describe the car Whitney had been in before she disappeared, but they did not see the license plate or the driver and did not take it seriously. Randy's parents did not pay much attention to the car because they knew Whitney was supposed to be picked up and taken to a party. They assumed that her friends had picked her up when she calmly got into the car, suggesting that she knew the driver. Around 7 p.m., as darkness fell, the police left the Randy family home. They had not gathered any useful information from witnesses and decided to check the area of the street where Whitney had disappeared. Randy's parents reported seeing a suspicious dark burgundy car with tinted windows parked there. The car sat next to the family's white pickup truck until Whitney left the house and got into the car. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in the area. As the police passed the pickup, they accidentally noticed some suspicious items in its open bed. Inside, they found several black garbage bags with remnants of adhesive tape, along with women's gloves caked in mud. The collection of items did not resemble those typically used for hunting. The officers were aware that garbage bags and tape are often associated with covering up murders. The items appear to have been used to restrain someone and then quickly discarded. On the tape, police found several strands of hair stuck together, similar in color and length to Whitney's. There was also a large two-wheeled luggage cart that looked dirty, indicating it had been recently driven on a dirt road. Initially, police did not alert the cart's owner to their discovery. However, they began to suspect the family's involvement in Whitney's disappearance. The police calmly returned to the house and requested to inspect the Whitney room. They aimed to conduct a search and obtain her mobile phone and computer for analysis. Valerie permitted the police to enter. Police inspected the Whitney room and found the she-mobile phone, along with an almost empty roll of tape identical to the one found in the pickup truck. Hair was present on the tape. Officers reported this finding to the homeowners and requested an explanation. Randy's parents remained calm and began answering questions. They explained that Whitney had been cleaning her room and that her hair may have gotten caught in the tape while she was combing her hair. She had recently been sick, causing her hair to fall out, which everyone, including Randy, confirmed. Despite their confident statements, the police suspected that Valerie and her husband Randy were lying, and the explanation of hair falling out and getting stuck in the tape seemed implausible. The police did not notice any change in their behavior as they explained the evidence. However, after a while, Randy's father became very emotional. He was breathing heavily, could not sit still, and took a long time to answer each question the police asked. They found his behavior suspicious and decided to question him further at the police station. He was taken there and repeated the same story as his son. According to him, there had been a serious argument just before Whitney left for the party. The conflict began with Whitney and Randy arguing in their room. Randy's mother Valerie intervened when Whitney became angry, she claiming that she had evidence that Randy was cheating on her and was determined to break up with him. Not only did she intend to leave him, but she also intended to take her daughter back to her mother's house. During the argument, Valerie entered the room when she heard the commotion, trying to calm Whitney down. Meanwhile, Randy, upset about the situation, went to a party by himself. According to Valerie, after calming Whitney down, she left with her friends in an unknown car, leaving everyone uncertain about her whereabouts. Randy's father later confirmed that his son had been unfaithful and had a mistress. This came to light when the mistress reported that she was pregnant just days before Whitney went missing. Whitney believed that the child was her husband's and the mistress's, which caused her to leave him. The situation seemed suspicious, especially since Randy had withheld this information during the initial interrogation and his family had a motive for wanting to get rid of Whitney. Randy was also questioned by the police. He was asked why he had not mentioned the argument over the mistress. Randy said that he had not told the police right away because he thought it was irrelevant to the search for Whitney and did not want to incriminate himself. At the time, Whitney's death was unknown. However, the police believed that this fact, combined with the conflict with Randy's parents, sealed Whitney's fate. Randy confirmed his father's account, admitting that during the argument, he and Whitney were in his room on the second floor. Whitney initiated the argument, accusing him of cheating and declaring she would end their relationship and move out with her daughter. When his mother got involved, they continued the discussion loudly and went downstairs. Eventually, the argument subsided, but Randy heard some strange. A few minutes later, his father walked into Randy's room, clearly agitated, and made an unusual request. He asked Randy to leave the house for a few days and make public appearances so people would know where he was. Without questioning what had happened, Randy packed his things and went to see his friends, with whom he had planned to hang out that night. He never saw Whitney again. Randy's behavior seemed strange and the police were puzzled as to why he would leave the house at his father's request without asking about the situation downstairs. Randy explained that he was upset and distracted by problems with his mistress, so he trusted his parents. He assumed that his father was asking him to take a few days off so that Whitney could cool down after their argument. But because of their conflict, Randy did not look for her and left without her. Everyone at the party assumed that Whitney was not there because of their argument. No one suspected that she might have disappeared or been harmed. The party guests noticed Randy's sadness throughout the evening. He tried calling Whitney several times, but she did not answer. He did not really know what was wrong with her and thought that she was ignoring him because of their argument. However, Randy understood that she could not have simply disappeared. Even if they split, they still have many related issues to resolve, including child custody. Finally, Randy went to the police, and Whitney's body was later discovered at the bottom of a ravine. All evidence pointed to Randy's parents as the perpetrators, having killed Whitney on the first floor and then disposing of her body to make it look like a suicide. However, experienced forensic experts and police saw through the deception. The police informed Valerie, Randy, and his family that Whitney's body was not found. This was to emotionally shock them and to see how the suspects would react. After the news of the death was announced, the police noticed how Randy's family members reacted. Randy's father immediately became concerned, but not because he was sad about Whitney's death. It was clear that he was hiding something and was afraid of being found out. In response, the police decided to make a bold move. They showed Randy's father photos of the scene where Whitney was found. Upon seeing the horrifying images of his niece's mother's body, the man broke down, revealing his guilt. This psychological tactic helped expose his involvement. The man started speaking, stating that on the day Whitney disappeared, he was napping in the bedroom on the first floor. He was jolted awake by a loud, suspicious noise. The disturbance from the next room lasted for several minutes. Concerned, he got up to see what was happening. When he entered the adjacent bedroom, he found Whitney lying motionless on the bed, face up. A bag was tightly taped around her neck. Next to the bed, Valerie stood holding a roll of adhesive tape. The man reported being in shock, with the next few hours feeling like a blur. His wife told him that she was filled with rage upon realizing she would never see her granddaughter again, which led her to instinctively strangle Whitney. The man quietly assisted his wife in disposing of the body, acting mechanically. Before this, he had sent his son away to prevent him from witnessing the incident. After the son left, the man returned to the room where Valerie was trying to place the body in large plastic bags. He described himself as being in a strange state, silently watching in pain but unable to act. He remained in a stupor until his wife asked him to bring a two-wheeled cart and a large bag. After Valerie and her husband managed to pack Whitney's body, they loaded it into the back of a pickup truck. They returned to the house and stayed there for a while as Valerie decided where to dispose of the body. She chose a cliff near the lake. Since they couldn't leave Whitney's 2-year-old daughter alone in the house, they placed her in the back seat of the truck. They arrived at the location late at night. The child was asleep and unaware that her mother's body was being disposed of at that moment. The most tragic part is that Whitney's death was caused by people she considered close and trusted. After dumping the body, the couple gathered trash bags, duct tape, a bag, and a cart intending to dispose of the evidence later. The police later discovered the evidence, and they never had a chance to dispose of it. During the interrogation, Valerie remained calm and emotionless. While she was in another room, the police interviewed each suspect separately, and Valerie did not know that her husband had confessed until the very end. She still insisted that Whitney had left in an unknown car. However, Valerie's demeanor changed dramatically when police informed her of her husband's confession from the next room. No longer needing to pretend, she admitted to strangling Whitney, corroborating her husband's as the only person present at the time of the victim's death. Valerie could finally recount what happened on that fateful evening. According to the woman, a heated argument erupted between Whitney and Randy upstairs. When Whitney threatened to leave with the child, the woman intervened. Whitney became enraged, threatening to cut off all contact between the child and her grandparents. Valerie was terrified that Whitney would follow through on her threats. The thought of losing contact with her beloved granddaughter was unbearable. In a moment of desperation, Valerie lost control and attacked Whitney, strangling her. Valerie described the incident as a moment of insanity, claiming she never intended to kill Whitney. Despite this, the physical evidence suggested otherwise, with marks on Whitney's body indicating a violent struggle. Valerie claimed that they had argued. After the bag was placed around Whitney's neck, Valerie appeared in a doorway, dazed with shock. Valerie then ordered her husband to send Randy away to provide him with an alibi. Valerie's confession matched this account. She claimed that the attack occurred while she was emotionally distressed, implying that she did not realize what she was doing. This confession was particularly disturbing to the police, as the murder was committed in front of a child and the body was disposed of with the child present. Valerie and her husband were arrested, but Randy was not, due to lack of evidence against him. This caused public outrage, as neighbors and relatives of the deceased believed that Randy was involved in the crime. They suspected that Randy's parents had covered for him so that he could retain custody of the children and remain free. Suspicions grew because Randy had left the scene of the murder and had previously concealed information from the police. Additionally, his father had advised him to have an alibi, which further cast doubt on his innocence. People questioned whether a 52-year-old woman could have overpowered the young, healthy Whitney. Despite these suspicions, Randy denied all charges and passed a polygraph test, which resulted in him being cleared of all charges. In preparation for trial in December 2020, Randy's Rodney Sr. father pursued a plea deal. In exchange for his cooperation, he received a 3-year prison sentence and was released on March 28, 2023. Valerie Ryder's trial began in February 2021, where her defense attorneys proclaimed her innocence and argued that Whitney had been abducted and killed by someone else. They also implicated Randy's father, Rodney Sr., as the real culprit. However, the prosecution effectively countered these claims by introducing DNA evidence linking Valerie to the crime. Both her husband and son testified against her, leaving little hope for the defense. Ultimately, the jury found Valerie Ryder guilty of first-degree murder and tampering with evidence and sentenced her to life in prison. She will be eligible for parole in 21 years. In 2041, Jodie Meyers' family described her as someone that loved life and lived it to the fullest. Always positive and smiling, 20-year-old Jodie was a doting mother to her baby boy Elijah. Those that knew her said becoming a mom was the best thing that ever happened to her, and her son was her whole world. 2-year-old Elijah's father was 29-year-old Neil Archer. He and Jodie were engaged and lived together in Mannum, South Australia. Just down the road from them live Neil's mother Margaret and her husband Lawrence. August 26, 2015. Jodie and Neil were invited to Jodie's stepfather's birthday party. Jodie spent time with her family enjoying the barbecue and campfire. But Neil never emerged from the car and refused to engage in the celebrations or accept any of the food. He just sat in the car and waited for Jodie. At around 7:30, 8 o'clock, Jodie joined Neil and they both drove home together. 2 days later, Lucy, Jodie's mother, got a text message from Jodie's phone. The message said that she had left Neil and gone to stay with some friends while she sorted everything out. But she hadn't taken Elijah with her, and Lucy knew Jodie would never have left her baby boy behind. Lucy replied to the message, but got no response back. She showed the message to her eldest daughter, and her reaction was the same as Lucy's. This wasn't Jodie texting. They went straight to the police with their concerns. Detectives in the team at the Major Crime Squad agreed and felt it was highly unlikely that Jodie would have just upped and left, especially without her son. As word spread about Jodie's strange disappearance, her fiancé, Neil, and his mother, Margaret, started making pleas for her to come home. Neil and his mother, Margaret, told the police that they had seen Jodie leave in a red car with a mystery couple. They said they didn't know the couple, but they hoped that they were looking after Jodie while she took some space and time for herself. News outlets circulated images of the car, hoping for it to jog someone's memory. Several weeks would pass with still no sighting of or word from Jodie. Searches were being conducted throughout the town and alongside the bank of the River Murray, but no clues turned up anywhere. A small glimmer of hope came when they looked into Jodie's bank records and found that $250 had been withdrawn from her account at a nearby ATM machine. This $250 was the last of her savings, and just hours later her phone suddenly had credit in it before the message was sent to her mom, Lucy. Police set about obtaining any and all the footage they could from that street to see if they could spot Jodie. While the police were working on this, Neil and Margaret were fast becoming a regular feature on the local news, and reporters were firing some tough questions at Neil. The more the pair spoke to the media and inserted themselves into the investigation, the more people started to question them. Jodie's family had concerns about Neil from the get-go. They said he didn't fit in with the rest of the family and made no effort to do so. He never came across as someone that was a reliable and stable presence in Jodie's life. Jodie's brother-in-law Michael said that he was always a little off-center from everything. Jodie's mother was also hesitant about the relationship from the beginning. She said she felt Jodie made out to family and friends that she was happier than she actually was. At one point, Jodie had said she could finally start to see what Neil was trying to do, which was take her away from her family. Neil's behavior became more controlling and manipulative. He always had to have access to her Facebook account and stopped her from going to see people without him. Neil had to know where Jodie was and who she was with all the time. Another source of tension was Margaret Archer. Margaret was the mother of 4 boys. She raised her sons in Adelaide before moving to a housing estate in the small town of Manham, South Australia. Neil lived with her until his mid-20s. That was until he met Jodie. Margaret adored Neil and her grandson Elijah, but she showed very little care for Jodie. It's said that Margaret would often take Elijah inside and lock Jodie out of the house, keeping him from her. The relationship between Neil and Jodie became more and more toxic, and by early 2015, Jodie confided in her family that she wanted to leave him. Neil caught wind of this and blamed Jodie's family for getting involved in the relationship. Jodie's brother-in-law Michael told Neil if Jodie wanted to leave, he had 2 choices: fight for her and try and work through it, or just walk away and let her live her life. Neil turned to him, emotionless, and said, "I will kill her." By mid-September, Neil Archer was officially named as a person of interest. Police now had reason to believe that Jodie had been met with foul play and was likely deceased. Once the CCTV near the ATM machine had been processed, police could finally see exactly who it was withdrawing the money. Margaret Archer was seen withdrawing the $250. She was wearing a gray hoodie and dark trousers, while Neil, wearing a baseball cap, leant against the wall waiting for her and keeping an eye out down the street. Footage then picked up Neil and Margaret in Neil's green Ford, driving and then parking outside a news agency. Margaret entered the news agency and bought a $10 credit voucher for a phone. After she left the shop, she headed back to the car where she and Neil waited for 6 minutes. During this time, the text that raised the red flag was sent from Jodie's phone to her mother. After the message was sent, the pair drove back. Just the day after Jodie was last seen, CCTV footage showed Margaret at Bunnings warehouse buying over 600 kilograms of cement, paid for with the cash she had taken from Jodie's bank account. Lawrence, Margaret's husband, had been away in Tasmania when Jodie disappeared, and when he returned, he was surprised to see that the shed floor had been newly concreted. Neil said they had done it as a Father's Day gift for him. Lawrence knew this was out of character, and said that Neil just wasn't the kind of guy to do something like that for somebody else. Lawrence innocently revealed all of this to the police. With all of this evidence mounting up and the police slowly closing in, it wasn't long before Neil cracked under pressure. One day with Margaret out the house, Neil decided it was time to confide in his brother Aaron. In the laundry room of the house, Neil bluntly said, "I killed her," and then quickly went to leave. But his brother stopped him in his tracks and demanded to know why he had done it. Neil said he knew Jodie was about to leave him and take Elijah too. Again, after admitting this, he hastily tried to walk away, but Aaron still had no intention of letting him leave. How, he asked him. Neil told him he had strangled Jodie in their home before taking her body to his mother's house and burying her under the tool shed. Aaron said his eyes were black, like nothing there. It was scary. It scared the shit out of me. Insisted Neil turn himself in, but when he didn't, Aaron decided to do it for him. Before long, police were at Margaret Archer's property and Neil Archer was charged with murder. Jodie Meyers' body was discovered in a shallow grave under the concrete slab Neil had laid. This was just meters from where the pair had been courting the media and begging for Jodie's safe return. It was later confirmed that Jodie had been strangled with the cord from one of Neil's hoodies. Margaret Archer was later charged with helping Neil cover up the crime. Neil Archer eventually pled guilty to the murder of 20-year-old Jodie Meyers, sparing her family the agony of sitting through a painful trial. Under state law, he faced a non-parole period of at least 20 years, but he believed he deserved a special parole term because he had pled guilty in the first place. This came after a separate murder case upheld a non-parole period of 15 years for special reasons. Neil was hoping for the same ruling, and the court heard he was actually eligible for a 30% discount. Despite this, he was sentenced to life in prison with a non-parole period of 20 years for the murder of Jodie Meyers. Justice Trish Kelly said applying the full discount would have been disproportionate to the seriousness of the offense, and would be so inappropriate that it would shock the public conscience. The following year, Margaret Archer also pled guilty in the district court to one count of assisting an offender. She was sentenced to 6.5 years with a minimum non-parole period of 4 years. However, her sentence was backdated to when she was taken into custody back in December 2015, which means she was eligible for parole in 2019. Despite the police and Jodie's family's beliefs, Margaret still maintains she had nothing to do with the murder itself. Jodie's son Elijah now lives with his grandmother Lucy. Elijah keeps a photo of Jodie with him all the time so he can carry on sharing things with her. Lucy said that one Christmas Elijah got a bicycle. He took the photo of his mother out to show her his gift and then sat the photo on the table so she could watch him ride his new bike. The case of Matthew Patrick Matt Podolak. Matthew Patrick Matt Podolak, born June 10, 1975, in Ohio, USA, to Patricia Romano and Leonard Podak. In high school, Matthew was a member of the hockey team. After graduating, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy and later worked at Phoenix Industrial Finishing, a company owned by his uncle. Although this provided opportunities for advancement, but Matthew encountered difficulty to connect with his co-workers, who may have felt jealous of his privileged position. His sister, Chrissy Duca, attributed the tension was partly due to rumors of a possible promotion, which his colleagues believed he did not deserve. Outside of work, Matthew was an outdoors enthusiast who enjoyed activities such as boating, camping, and hunting. He also played softball and hockey during his free time. In 2003, Matthew met Holly McFeature, and they began dating shortly after, eventually they moving in together in Cleveland. The relationship marked a new chapter in Matthew's life. Friends said that he was eager to settle down and start a family. Matthew and Holly had 2 children together, Samantha and Josh, and also raised Holly's child from a previous relationship as part of their family. Matthew's mother, Patricia, said he loved Holly very much, and his feelings for her were sincere. Matthew's life underwent a drastic change when he transformed from a bachelor to a father of 3 in a short period. Initially, his relationship with Holly was filled with love and mutual understanding. However, by 2005, their romance had turned sour, becoming increasingly argumentative and strained. On multiple occasions, Matthew would leave home after a fight with Holly and spend the night with a friend. Friends, who had grown concerned about the relationship, advised Matthew to end things with Holly, citing her selfish behavior as a major red flag. Despite their warnings, Matthew refused to listen and continually returned to Holly. Furthermore, Matthew had taken out a life insurance policy that named Holly as the beneficiary. Despite the advice of friends to remove her from the policy, Matthew did not make any changes. During this time, Matthew's behavior was erratic, which ranged from extreme happiness to intense anger, upset, and fear. According to Matthew's best friend, Russell, he had become depressed during this time. However, he seemed overly optimistic about his future, particularly when it came to raising his 3 children, a prospect that filled him with both hope for the future. Russell advised Matthew to take precautions and remove the guns from their home due to the volatile situation they were in. After the hockey season ended in 2006, he started online gambling, which resulted in him losing a lot of money. His family and friends noticed that he was struggling with depression and advised him to see a doctor. He followed their advice and was prescribed antidepressants. By the spring of 2006, Matthew's health started to deteriorate. His condition worsened by Memorial Day weekend, causing Russell to become extremely concerned about Matthew's physical well-being. Around that time, Russell had asked he for help transferring a motor from one boat to another. However, he was no longer the strong person he once was, experiencing severe back pain and complaining of excessive sweating and a lack of strength. Russell urged Matthew to see a doctor and recommended Dr. Thomas Mandat. He scheduled an appointment with Dr. Mandat for July 26, 2006. On the day of the appointment, he called Russell to ask for directions to the doctor's office. During their conversation, Russell could hear Holly arguing with Matthew in the background. Matthew visited the doctor, complaining of back pain. After examining him, Dr. Mandat diagnosed he with kidney stones and prescribed medication to help pass the stones and alleviate the associated pain. In a phone call to his father on the afternoon of July 30th, Matthew shared his excitement about buying a new fishing rod for his daughter. He was looking forward to taking her fishing, hoping they could go together soon, along with his father. Matthew's anticipation for their upcoming family outing were evident in the conversation with his father. On the evening of the same day, Matthew attended a party with Russell. He found Matthew's health condition alarming. Matthew had gained significant weight, was sweating excessively, and struggled to walk. Matthew also complained of severe back pain. Later that evening, Matthew's condition worsened, and Holly became concerned. She called 911 and then contacted Matthew's father, informing him that something was wrong with his son. Matthew's father had a brief phone conversation with him and found he to be confused and very distressed. Matthew was rushed to the emergency room at Parma General Hospital, where doctors suspected he was experiencing organ failure. Tests revealed that Matthew's kidneys had failed and he was suffering from metabolic acidosis, a condition where the blood becomes highly acidic. Dr. Mandat, an emergency room doctor, suspected that Matthew had ingested a toxic substance, such as methanol or antifreeze. When questioned, Holly denied the possibility that Matthew had swallowed antifreeze or medical alcohol, asserting that he had not consumed anything that could have caused harm. On July 31, 2006, Matthew passed away at the hospital due to kidney failure. According to Dr. Mandat's testimony, Matthew's death was not caused by respiratory problems, as metabolic acidosis typically is. Instead, Dr. Mandat explained that ethylene glycol can also cause this condition. After Matthew's death, his family and friends were overcome with grief, but Holly seemed unaffected. In the days that followed, her friend Rebecca Vega tried to offer support and accompanied her to the funeral home. However, Vega noticed that Holly did not feel sad at all. At the wake, Matthew's father had to ask Holly to join the family in the main room to receive visitors, and even then, she appeared to be unfeeling and indifferent. Russell recalled that Holly acted like it was a normal gathering, showing no signs of grief. The day after Matthew's death was particularly telling. Holly used Matthew's bank card to withdraw money from an ATM and wrote checks in his name, draining his bank account. When Matthew's mother reported Holly's suspicious behavior to the police, Holly was arrested and charged with 2 counts of forgery. She later agreed to restitution and was placed on probation for 1 year. Holly was the beneficiary of Matthew's life insurance policy. Although the policy was relatively small and she received only $10,000 after his death. 2 weeks later, her friend Rebecca visited Holly and noticed various cleaning supplies, including what appeared to be solvents, left out in the open. Since there were small children living in the house, Rebecca found this absurd and asked Holly about it. She calmly explained that one of the items was antifreeze, which Matthew used to winterize his boat. However, Russell disagreed with this and stated that Matthew's boat had not been operational since its engine broke down in 2004 or 2005. Holly's demeanor after Matthew's death raised concerns with others. For example, she had an intimate relationship with Michael Gima, a Cleveland police officer who would often visit her home for coffee. Michael had known Holly since 2002. One day, Michael called Holly to ask if he should come to her house at this time. She replied that there was no need to worry about it anymore because Matthew died last week without showing any emotion. She attributed Matthew's death to kidney issues and pain from playing hockey, but her tone came across as careless and heartless. Following Matthew's death, his belongings were removed from the house. Holly asked a friend to erase some content from Matthew's computer and then cut up his clothes to make a quilt. 6 weeks after Matthew's passing, Holly began dating Charles Liffam, a Cleveland police officer. Initially, She told Charles that Matthew had died from kidney failure. However, after the autopsy report was released in January 2007, she changed her story. The autopsy revealed that Matthew had an unusually large amount of ethylene glycol in his system, the key ingredient in antifreeze. Later, Holly told Charles that Matthew might have intentionally taken something to end his life. The autopsy report confirmed that Matthew died from chronic ethylene glycol intoxication, but the coroner was unable to determine how or why he ingested the substance. It's worth noting that Holly told Charles that she didn't know what antifreeze was. Holly also provided conflicting explanations for Matthew's death, telling friend Sean Walsh that Matthew had died in an industrial accident. She also said that one of his co-workers might have poisoned him out of envy due to his connection to the boss. However, Matthew's family suspects that the truth behind his death may have been caused by someone close to him. This skepticism is partly due to Holly's indifferent attitude at the funeral, which contrasted with claims from Holly's sister that she had been crying in the car beforehand. During the investigation, detectives discovered 2 bottles of antifreeze in the garage of the house Holly had relocated from, which they took into evidence in 2007. The findings were recorded in a police report. Later in 2007, after parting ways with Charles, Holly met Jameson Kennedy while working at a bar. As they started dating, Holly chose not to share any details about Matthew's death with Jameson. However, Jameson has a troubled past with multiple convictions and struggles with addiction. One evening in September 2008, Holly and Jameson were together, consuming alcohol and Take Action Intimate. According to Jameson, Holly became emotional. She began crying and confided in him about Matthew's death. She expressed her desire to leave Cleveland and put the past behind her, confessed to putting something in Matthew's drinks that made him ill and ultimately led to his death. However, Jameson was unsure if she was telling the truth. Seeking advice, Jameson met with his friend Santiago Feliciano, a lawyer, and shared Holly's confession with him. Santiago recommended that Jameson report this information to the authorities if he believed it to be true. Jameson then called Holly to discuss her earlier confession, unaware that their conversation was being recorded. He hoped she will turn herself in and admit that she is the one who caused Matthew's death. Instead, Holly vehemently denied ever harming Matthew, claiming Jameson was misinterpreting her. The conversation between Holly and Jameson caused a rift in their relationship. Jameson began to suspect that Holly was cheating on him. On November 8, 2008, Jameson went to her house to confront her. Feeling threatened, Holly called the police. When the officers arrived, Jameson attacked them and was subsequently arrested and charged with assault. Jameson was sentenced to 10 years in prison after being found guilty of assaulting officers. Following his arrest, he informed the police about a confession he'd have heard from Holly, reportedly linking her to the death of Matthew. This added to the evidence of Holly's involvement in Matthew's death. The police initially investigated the death in 2007 after the autopsy report was released. But the case stalled for many years because they initially did not consider it an intentional act. Re-examine the case, it is essential to look at the autopsy report. Dr. Galita, an experienced forensic pathologist and medical examiner, conducted the autopsy. Then, Dr. Galita and County Coroner Dr. Elizabeth Balch released their autopsy report in January 2007. The report determined Matthew's death was caused by chronic ethylene glycol poisoning, although the circumstances surrounding it were unclear. When Matthew ingested ethylene glycol, it entered his bloodstream and was quickly broken down by his liver using an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase. This process converted the ethylene glycol into oxalate, which then combined with calcium to form sharp calcium oxalate crystals. A large number of these crystals accumulated in Pack's kidneys, causing a blockage that disrupted their function. According to Dr. Galita, the severe pain Matthew experienced in his side starting on May 20, 2006, was likely caused by the crystals in his kidneys. When Dr. Galita examined Matthew's kidneys, he found 2 significant things. In addition to kidney damage, there are signs that the kidneys are beginning to heal. Further examination revealed the emergence of the crystals in Matthew's heart and brain, as well as severe acute myocarditis. Myocarditis is an acute inflammation of the heart muscle. The doctor stated that Matthew's myocarditis could not have been caused by an ingestion of ethylene glycol. Instead, the inflammation would have taken at least 3 weeks to develop. He also ruled out a heart attack as the cause of death. In conclusion, Dr. Galita determined that Matthew's death was the result of long-term ethylene glycol poisoning. He believed a series of but acute toxicity episodes, occurring over at least a 3-month period, ultimately led to his death. Matthew often drank iced tea at work, particularly raspberry flavor. He usually brought it in a thermos or the container. A Matthew's friend, Michael Mao, testified that Holly frequently brought Matthew lunch at work. His meal often came with a half or whole gallon container of iced tea. The police found 2 bottles of antifreeze in the garage of Holly's former home in August 2007. The bottles, one a Peak brand and the other a Saturn brand, were discovered after she had moved out. 3 years after Matthew's autopsy results were released, and report amendment was made to the report in 2010. The revised report, signed by County Coroner Dr. Frank Miller, confirmed that Matthew died from poisoning by ethylene glycol, a toxin found in antifreeze, in long-term, and deemed the death a homicide. 6 years after Matthew's death, the authorities decided it was time to arrest Holly. She was formally charged in July of that year, with the serious offense of depriving Matthew of his life. Holly's charges came as no surprise to Matthew's family. According to his older brother, Mark, they suspected Holly's involvement in his younger brother's death all along. Mark stated that Holly's behavior around the time of the death raised suspicions, saying she just wasn't acting like somebody who was losing a loved one. Authorities suspected that Holly had been secretly poisoning Matthew by adding antifreeze to his cold raspberry tea for several weeks or even months. In 2013, she went to court, pleading not guilty to the charges. However, there was no direct evidence, only indirect indications of her guilt. To prove their case, the prosecution called 15 witnesses to testify. These witnesses included Matthew's family and friends, Dr. Galita, who conducted the autopsy, Dr. Thomas Mandat, who was Matthew's doctor, and several police officers who investigated the case. Witnesses focused on several key points, including Holly's suspicious actions, a phone call Matthew made before visiting the doctor, and the fact that Matthew had not owned a functioning boat since 2004, which meant he had no use for antifreeze. Holly's defense team countered by stating that Matthew's family and friends had prejudged her as guilty and then pressured law enforcement to bring charges against her following Matthew's death. The prosecution's strongest testimony came from Dr. Galita, the medical examiner in charge of performing the autopsy. Dr. Galita provided a detailed explanation for his conclusion that Matthew was the victim of chronic poisoning over a period of 3 months. He arrived at this conclusion because on the emergence of crystals in Matthew's kidneys and myocarditis, a type of inflammation of the heart muscle that can be caused by exposure to ethylene glycol. After ruling out causes other of myocarditis, such as infection, Dr. Galita emphasized that Matthew's condition could not have been the result of a single short-term exposure to ethylene glycol. Dr. Galita also clarified why the initial autopsy report, completed in 2007, did not indicate that Matthew's death was intentional. He explained that, at the time, the coroner's office did not have enough information to make this determination, which led to the manner of death being listed as undetermined. However, after further investigation, the report was revised. The testimony of other witnesses supported Dr. Galita's findings. Matthew's friends reported that his health began to decline in the spring of 2006, which was confirmed by his diagnosis of kidney stones in July 2006. The friends also described a volatile relationship between Matthew and Holly, stating that Matthew seemed fearful and had removed his firearms from the home at the advice of a friend. Holly's lawyers claimed that their client was not involved in Matthew's death, suggesting instead that Matthew's depression led him to end his life. According to the defense, Matthew was struggling with losses from online gambling, work-related issues, and difficulties communicating with his child, ultimately leading him to deliberately ingest a lethal dose of antifreeze. The defense argued that Matthew died from a single dose of antifreeze rather than from prolonged exposure over several weeks or months. In support of this theory, they brought Dr. Robert Lux to testify in court, the coroner from El Paso County, Colorado. Dr. Lux testified that Matthew's death was a result of acute poisoning due to a single ingestion of ethylene glycol indicating a possible suicidal intent. He disputed Dr. Galita's diagnosis of myocarditis and instead believed Matthew had suffered a heart attack. Furthermore, Dr. Lux explained that myocarditis can occur independently of ethylene glycol poisoning and that flank pain is not typically a symptom of ethylene glycol poisoning. He said that there was no connection between kidney stones and ethylene glycol poisoning, a relevant detail in the case. Several key witnesses testified during the trial. One notable witness was Jameson Kennedy, a felon who had been serving a 10-year sentence for assaulting police officers. Jameson claimed that Holly had confessed to him that she had mixed something into Matthew's drinks. However, Holly denied ever making such a statement. Holly argued that Jameson's testimony was motivated by a desire for leniency in his own case or revenge against her. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury delivered a guilty verdict on all counts. On August 28, 2013, the court sentenced Holly McFeature to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. This next case will take us to the Bronx, a borough of New York that is often regarded as the birthplace of hip-hop music. It is also home to the famous Yankee Stadium and the largest urban zoo in the United States. On the flip side, the Bronx is plagued by gang-related violence. Jasmine grew up in Long Island, and according to her family, she was a very friendly individual who enjoyed having fun. She was a phenomenal singer, a professional singer. Jasmine's younger sister, Shauna Porter White, told the media. She was very outgoing, and she trusted a lot of people. Everyone was her friend. I told her everyone's not your friend, she added. By 1996, Jasmine Porter was 36 years old and a mother to a 4-year-old boy called Jeremy. She lived a peaceful life with her son in an apartment on Davidson Avenue in the Bronx. We never thought she would become a mom. Jasmine's brother Derek Porter said, "She liked to have fun. She enjoyed life. When she did get pregnant and finally had the baby, she was a great mom." According to Derek, Jasmine was studying and had dreams of one day landing an administrative job with her degree. However, Jasmine would not live long enough to see that dream fulfilled. On February 5, 1996, authorities responded to a call from Jasmine's neighbors. They were concerned that they hadn't seen her or Jeremy for some days. When neighbors didn't see him go to school that Monday, they realized something was wrong and called the police, Derek said. When authorities arrived at Jasmine's apartment, they opened the door and found her dead in the front bedroom with Jeremy beside her. Jasmine had been dead for about 2 days when her body was found. All the while, her son had stayed beside her. It was a horrible scene to behold. He locked himself in the apartment with her, tried to clean her nose, wipe the blood off her nose, Derek recalled. The bond between mother and son is huge. He didn't leave her side, he added. It was discovered that Jasmine had been sexually assaulted and then strangled to death. This was obvious from the severe trauma she suffered to the neck. Authorities declared her death to be a homicide. This was corroborated by Jeremy, who had watched his mother die in front of him. The son indicated there was a man sitting on top of his mother and that the man was naked, said Detective Robert Klein, a homicide investigator that had worked on the case. He stated that he tried to help her, but the killer was too heavy and that the man yelled at him to get away. Derek also spoke about what Jeremy had told him after his mother was killed. "I picked him up and he talked to me. The person actually was going to strangle him, and he didn't." Also, at the time of Jasmine's death, she had been 6 months pregnant. Her death was a tragic loss to her family and friends, and authorities made it a priority to hunt down her killer. But after several weeks of interviewing people, the investigators found nothing. They were not closer to solving the case, and it was frustrating. The case went cold, and it seemed Jasmine's killer had gotten away with the crime for good. In early 2021, Detective Robert overheard a robbery suspect speaking about Jasmine's murder. This had been during a jailhouse call. It's unclear what the suspect had said precisely, but it was enough to spur Robert into reopening the cold case. "But in the interim, I got a hold of the case file," Detective Robert said. "I started tracking down people interviewed back in '96, and I also got a hold of the forensic biology report. It soon came to the detective's attention that scrapings taken from underneath Jasmine's finger had never been tested. This was because the technology to carry out such tests had not been available at the time of the murder. Detective Robert soon submitted the scrapings for analysis and patiently waited for the result. I knew there was a high probability that there would be the suspect's DNA under those nails, Detective Robert said. The first step was to obviously find that evidence, which can sometimes be tricky, but in my efforts to reach out to the office of the chief medical examiner and the people over there, they actually were able to find it. Took a while, but they found it. The DNA evidence led authorities to a man named Gregory Fleetwood. Gregory was a man with a criminal record. He had been convicted of strangling a woman to death back in 1987, and just like Jasmine, the woman had also been pregnant. For the crime, Gregory was found guilty and imprisoned. However, he served only 7 years in prison and was released in August 1994. The reason for his early release was that the murder charge had been reduced to a lighter charge of manslaughter. It was a shock that he murdered Jasmine barely 2 years after his release. Gregory's DNA was also linked to many other violent crimes of sexual assault, which took place over the years. One of these had taken place a month after Jasmine's murder, and as a matter of fact, it was right next door to where Jasmine lived. Gregory was soon arrested at his apartment in the Williams Bridge section of the Bronx, and was charged with murder. After Gregory was taken into custody, he maintained his innocence by insisting that he had never met Jasmine before and had no hand in her death. He basically denied ever having known the victim, ever having interacted with her, and said that if for some reason his DNA was on her, that's a mistake that we made, Detective Robert said. The detective soon shared news of the arrest with Jasmine's family. When I called Miss Porter White and informed her, it was very emotional for her, Detective Robert said. When we got the call, it was amazing that she wasn't forgotten. It's good work. The police department doesn't always get their dues, Derek said. Derek also spoke highly of Detective Robert, praising him for his role in the case. That detective, I have tears in my eyes when I think of Detective Klein. What he did for our family, he treated Jasmine like she was his own sister. Sadly, Jasmine's mother and younger brother Jason had passed away by this time and were not around to witness the breakthrough in the case. I can't think of anything that's more gratifying than taking a case that's sort of lying dormant for so long. Justice is at least on its way to being served. It's sort of the pinnacle of my police career, Detective Robert said. As for Gregory, who is now 66 years old, he could face 25 years to life imprisonment if found guilty of Jasmine's murder. In 1980, 20-year-old Robin Brooks lived in an apartment on Tally Ho Drive in the beautiful city of Sacramento. Sacramento is a city with a rich history. It has so many nicknames, including the City of Trees. Following the discovery of gold in the area back in the 18th century, gold seekers came in large numbers to mine the precious metal. At present, Sacramento is famous for its extensive and vibrant agriculture. Robin was born in Fort Lee, Virginia, but lived most of her life in Highland, New York. She was carefree, fun-loving, and well-loved by her family. She didn't have fear, not like I had. Maria Eric, Robin's elder sister, had said. It was more anxious, a little more careful. When Robin was around the age of 19, she decided to move to Sacramento with Maria. She had always longed to experience something new, and moving to Sacramento seemed perfect. In the new city, the two sisters settled in quite nicely. At the time, Maria was romantically involved with a man named Norbert Holston. Norbert was known for his anger issues, and this ugly side of him put a strain on his relationship with Maria. It also affected his relationship with Robin, which contributed to why the two sisters chose to live separately. However, Maria wasn't comfortable with her sister living alone. She worried for her safety, but when she made her concerns known to Robin, it only led to an argument. I was the older sister, and I always felt like I was her protector. When she came out here, she was just having fun. She was 20, Maria said. Robin worked at a donut shop off Kiefer Boulevard, a few blocks from where she lived. Since she had no car, it became routine for her to walk all the way to work and back to her apartment at the end of her shift. Life in Sacramento seemed good, and Robin was enjoying every moment of it, but it wouldn't be for long. On April 24, 1980, she worked late until around midnight. There was nothing unusual about this since her shift ended around that time. Robin couldn't wait to leave work and go home. Joan Olson, a co-worker at the donut shop, had later said she was joking about having to go home and make her bed before she could crawl into it. She had stripped the bed and done the laundry before she came to work, and she was joking about how it wasn't fair to have to make a bed at bedtime. Joan had added, as soon as Robin left for work, she made her way to her apartment. That would be the last time she was seen alive by anyone. Robin had a swim date planned with a couple of friends the next day. However, she did not show up for it. Her absence did not go unnoticed. Her shift at the donut shop was slated to begin at 4 p.m., but Robin did not turn up for work. This was quite strange, and her absence worried her coworkers. When she didn't show up, some of them walked over to her apartment to find out what was wrong. On getting there, they discovered that Robin's door was locked. They banged on the door several times and called her name but got no response. Several worrying thoughts began to race through their minds. Had she left town without informing anybody? Was she asleep inside the house? They knew they had to find their way into the apartment to really know if she was inside or not. With the help of the house manager, they soon forced the front door open and stepped into a very silent house. Fearing the worst, they proceeded to the bedroom, and what they saw was too much to take in. Robin Brooks' lifeless body was right in the middle of a punctured waterbed. She had been bound and stabbed to death. It was an unsettling sight. Robin's coworkers wasted no time in letting the police know what had happened. And in a matter of minutes, detectives from the Sacramento Sheriff's Department arrived on the scene. An autopsy revealed that Robin had been sexually assaulted before she was stabbed 5 times. One of the knife blows had pierced her heart. Her killer's DNA was also found in her body. In addition to this, blood was found smeared on the wall of her apartment that was not Robin's. This made authorities infer that the killer had accidentally cut himself while assaulting Robin. Fingerprints belonging to an unidentified individual believed to be the killer were also found on the windowsill of Robin's apartment. This made detectives infer that whoever killed Robin had gotten in through the window. At the time, it seemed this evidence would be enough to quickly bring the killer to justice, but that was not the case. Authorities were handicapped by one major challenge. The technology available was not efficient enough to aid them in their investigative work. Due to this, several months and years went by without any progress being made in the case. Robin's killer continued to remain at large. Maria was hit hard by her sister's death. For a long time, she blamed herself for not being there for Robin. She was constantly depressed, and over time, she found solace in alcohol. This habit made her spiral downward, and a long battle with alcohol addiction began. In 2004, almost 24 years after Robin's brutal murder, a big break was made in the case. With advanced forensic technology, investigators were able to create a DNA profile of the killer from his blood. This new development gave investigators something more tangible to work with, and they hoped the killer would be caught in time. Several individuals believed to be the suspect's possible relatives were tested, but this yielded no result. Investigators were left even more frustrated than before. Detective Mickey Lynx, who had come out of retirement to dedicate her time to the case, had said in an interview, "It's very frustrating because we have our suspect, we have his DNA, and it's a full profile. We know who he is, we just need his name. We need to find who he is." In 2017, the case took an interesting turn. Investigators were able to get an idea of what the killer possibly looked like. This was made possible by a forensic method called DNA phenotyping. The method involves predicting the physical appearance of an unknown individual by using DNA extracted from semen, blood, or other bodily fluid. Physical features such as hair color, height, skin color, and a whole lot more can be determined using this process. In Robin's killer's case, authorities were able to create 2 composite sketches. One was of what he would look like at age 25, and the other was of what he would look like at age 56. These 2 profiles were released to the public with the hopes that someone would recognize the killer and come forward with vital information. But authorities were disappointed. Nothing came out of it. The only information authorities got was from an unnamed individual. This information was a different account of what they had initially believed happened on the day of Robin's murder. According to the informant, Robin had not gone home after leaving work. "We believe she was at a party that same evening with Hiram Johnson High School students," Sergeant Paul Belly, who worked on this case, said. This party had taken place at Roseport Way, and after the party, Robin had left for home. While all these revelations were coming to light and the investigation was ongoing, Maria had also gotten her life together. She overcame her alcohol addiction and decided that it was best she lived a life that honored her sister's memory. In 2020, investigators used a DNA search technique called genetic genealogy that helped them get closer to the truth. Genetic genealogy can be used to explore family trees by cross-referencing the DNA profile of an unknown person with that of other people in a public database. This method is very efficient and has been used to bring many elusive criminals to justice. With this method, investigators were able to connect the dots and find Robin's killer. A lab criminalist called Lynx's office line to inform her about the significant discovery, but Lynx couldn't be reached. When Lynx finally called back, the words she was told were, "You found your guy." "I literally hung up the phone and I jumped up and down and I was clapping my hands and I ran around the office to tell everybody," Lynx said. She informed Maria, who was also overjoyed by the news. "I was always so afraid he wouldn't be alive. What's a miracle is that DNA. It gives a lot of hope for other people. I never gave up," Maria said. The individual investigators discovered to be Robin's killer was a man by the name of Philip Lee Wilson. Wilson had continued living in Sacramento since the murder. He had been right under the nose of the authorities all the while, but they had no idea. On April 23, 2020, Wilson was arrested at the age of 71 in connection with the 40-year-old murder. He was held without bail and charged with 1 count of murder. Wilson maintained his innocence and the case went to trial. The trial took place nearly 2 years after his arrest. Prosecutors presented evidence that Wilson's DNA was a perfect match to the blood smeared on Robin's apartment wall back in 1980. The fingerprints found on the apartment's windowsill also matched his. According to prosecutors, Wilson snuck into her apartment through a window while she was sleeping. He bound her, sexually assaulted her, and killed her with a knife. Wilson's attorney, Thomas Klinkenbeard, did not dispute that the DNA was Wilson's. However, he argued that Wilson and Robin had known each other and they had had consensual intercourse on the day of the murder. Klinkenbeard also gave a reason as to why Wilson's blood had been found in Robin's apartment. The reason he gave was that Wilson had suffered a workplace injury. In addition to all this, Klinkenbeard then blamed Robin's murder on Maria's ex-boyfriend, Norbert. He described Norbert as a volatile and hot-tempered man who Maria had been afraid of. He made it known to the court that in the days leading to Robin's murder, both Norbert and Maria had gotten into an argument, and the situation had escalated, with Norbert threatening to kill both Maria and Robin. Klinkenbeard believed that Norbert had lived up to his threat by killing Robin. Well, Maria's testimony rendered this claim invalid. She told the court that Norbert had been with her the night of the murder. Norbert himself was not available to give testimony in court because he had died many years ago. After the trial, which lasted 10 days, the case was reviewed by the jury. On March 9, 2022, which was Wilson's 73rd birthday, they reached a verdict that he was guilty of the murder charge. This decision was made after the jury had initially failed to reach an agreement. More than a month after Wilson was convicted, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Maria was relieved and elated by the news. It was much needed closure after many years. "I feel like I can go on with my life now. I think the case absorbed a piece of who I was," Maria said. Lynx was also one of the people happy with the outcome of the case. "There is justice in the world, and he will spend all his birthdays now in prison," Lynx had said. "I wish we found him earlier, but finally justice has been done," she added. Sexual violence is a major societal and health problem that continues to be on the increase globally. The lives of many men and women have been drastically affected and scarred by one ugly encounter or the other. Some don't even live to tell the tale, just like the 3 victims of today's video. What are your views on sexual violence? Do you think additional measures should be implemented to reduce or eliminate this problem? In 1980, two unrelated women, Sandra DeFelice and Robin Brooks, were sexually assaulted and murdered just months apart. Then, in 1996, another woman, Jasmine Porter, met a similar fate. These three cases turned cold and remained unsolved for many years. Las Vegas is the most populous city in Nevada. What many don't know is that it was initially a small town founded in 1905. With time, it experienced a population explosion and rapid growth and development in various sectors. Today, the city is famous for its nightlife, casinos, and many points of interest, which attract tourists from all over the world. Sandra was originally from the capital city of Idaho, Boise. However, she eventually moved out of Boise with her childhood friend to Las Vegas. In Las Vegas, Sandra and her friend decided that it was best they stay together as roommates. The house they lived in was a short distance from a local park, as well as the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's downtown command center. This proximity to a police station offered some comfort and a sense of security to the two friends. There was another inhabitant in the house occupied by Sandra and her friend. This was Sandra's 3-year-old daughter, who she had with her boyfriend. To make ends meet in the new city, Sandra took up a job as a waitress at a popular restaurant called Sambo's Restaurant. Life seemed to be moving at a good pace for the 25-year-old mother, but things would soon take a different and very dark turn. Sandra had no idea that her life would come to an abrupt end on December 26, 1980. Post-Christmas festivity was still in the air, and no one living within the East Las Vegas neighborhood where Sandra resided would have expected a tragedy to occur. Around 9 p.m. on December 26th, Sandra's boyfriend decided to pay her a visit. On arriving at the house, he noticed that it was unusually quiet. Not knowing what to expect, he went straight to Sandra's room and was shocked to his core by the sight that greeted him. Lying face up on the bed was Sandra. She was dead and the walls were splattered with her blood. Her agitated boyfriend immediately sprung into action and called the police to report the incident. And in a matter of minutes, police officers from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department arrived. They determined that Sandra had been sexually assaulted, stabbed, and strangled to death. Sandra's daughter, who had gone to stay with her grandparents at the time, had not been around to witness the terrible scene. Sandra's family was devastated when they were given the news of her death. Investigators immediately commenced an investigation. Sandra's roommate was questioned, and she revealed that she had seen Sandra alive barely 2 hours before her death. At the scene of the murder, investigators were able to collect several dark hairs. They had been found on Sandra's stomach and were believed to belong to her killer. Sandra herself was blonde, so the dark hairs stood out. In addition, investigators also got their hands on several other items of evidence, and one of these included a drinking glass containing Kool-Aid. Upon further analysis, a fingerprint was discovered on the drinking glass, and it was not long before a match was found. The fingerprint belonged to a man by the name of Paul Newtall. He was immediately named as a person of interest. The investigation was moving quickly, and it seemed the authorities were making headway. However, they ended up being disappointed. Paul was brought in for questioning, but there was nothing tangible detectives could use to pin him to the murder. As it turned out, Paul was a close friend of Sandra's roommate. According to the roommate's explanation to the detectives, Paul had been at their residence the morning of the murder. She further explained that Paul had asked her to let him sleep in the house because he had nowhere else to go. She had declined, and her reason was that Sandra did not know him well. However, she later invited Paul in to wait for her while she got ready for work. She had told him they would leave together when she left the house. During this time, Paul helped himself to a glass of Kool-Aid. This perfectly explained why his fingerprint had been found on the drinking glass. The roommate also said that after she had gotten ready for work, she and Paul had then left the house. With this revelation, authorities had no choice but to let Paul go. He was deemed an innocent man. Authorities had no further leads after this, and as time went by, the case grew cold. It wasn't until February 2021 that the case would be reopened again. This reopening was prompted by a call from Sandra's daughter to the police department. She had asked for an update about her mother's death, and investigators decided it was high time the case was revisited. Upon a review of that investigation in conjunction with our DNA forensics lab, they were able to determine that there was additional evidence that could be submitted for processing using new DNA technology, Lieutenant Jason Johansson, who had investigated the case, said. The additional evidence that was submitted for testing was DNA that was found under Sandra's fingernails. This DNA had never been tested, and it proved to be the clue detectives needed to crack the case. The DNA was a match to a man, and this was none other than Paul Newtall. From the beginning, detectives had had their suspicions about him, but there was nothing they could do since the technology was limited at the time of Sandra's murder. And now, with the strong evidence, authorities knew they finally had him cornered. Paul was eventually arrested on October 27, 2022, at his home in Northwest Valley, Las Vegas. After Paul Newtall was taken into custody, my cold case investigators had the pleasure of making the one phone call that every cold case detective wants to make. Lieutenant Jason said during a news conference after Paul's arrest, "I am hopeful that in some way, shape, or form, this provides some sort of closure for the family," he added. Paul, who is currently 64 years of age, was slammed with charges including murder, sexual assault with the use of a deadly weapon, and burglary while in possession of a deadly weapon. A look at Paul's criminal history revealed that he had not been involved in any other violent crime. However, he had been arrested in the past for felony and drug possession. At the moment, it's still unclear what fate awaits him since his court case is still ongoing. There is also a concern that Paul might have impaired thinking and reasoning ability. Authorities believe that this might hinder him from understanding the charges against him. Due to this, he is being made to undergo a mental health evaluation. Case of Michelle Young. Jason Young was born in 1974 in Brevard, North Carolina. Jason grew up in a typical family. After completing high school, he attended the prestigious State University in Raleigh, the state capital. Following graduation, he secured a job as a salesman at a large retail chain. Jason proved to be a valuable and reliable employee, but his friends described him as inconsistent and unpredictable in his relationships. With women, he had a reputation for being a womanizer, often changing partners. Michelle Young was born in February 1977 in New York. She was raised in a close-knit family with her younger sister, Meredith, and their devoted mother, Linda. Linda played a significant role in Michelle's early life, nurturing her passions and talents from a young age. Michelle's interests in law and economics were evident from her school days, and she dreamed of pursuing a career in this field. Michelle's academic journey led her to apply to several universities after high school, eventually gaining acceptance into a top university in North Carolina. There, she pursued her master's degree in economics. After completing her education, secured a prestigious job at a leading accounting firm in the state, rapidly establishing herself as a skilled professional. She achieved financial stability, was able to support herself fully. A chance encounter at a bar on Michelle's birthday, when Jason accidentally spilled a cocktail on her, he immediately apologized and offered to buy her another. This kind and thoughtful act caught Michelle's attention and they began chatting. As they talked, they discovered that they had a lot in common. They both went to the same college, although Jason graduated 3 years earlier. Their casual conversation quickly turned into a romantic relationship and they began dating. Although they had deep feelings for each other, they had no plans to get married or move in together. At the time, Jason still lived with his parents in Brevard, while Michelle lived in Raleigh. They would see each other on weekends or during Jason's business trips to Raleigh. During one of their meetings, Michelle dropped a bombshell. She was pregnant. This news came as a shock to both of them, as they were not yet ready to become parents. Jason and Michelle were young and focused on their careers, with no immediate plans to start a family. However, when Michelle became pregnant, she decided to keep the baby after some initial hesitation. Jason took a month to come to terms with the situation and then relocated to be closer to Michelle. After a few months, they got married, but it wasn't due to love or the pregnancy. Instead, it was because Michelle lacked health insurance and the cost of childbirth would have been prohibitively expensive. Marriage provided a solution to this financial burden. Their daughter, Cassidy Elizabeth, was born in the spring of 2004. Michelle threw herself into domestic life and family responsibilities with the help of her mother and younger sister. Although Michelle's family was wary of Jason, they tried to avoid conflicts and accepted him as part of their family. Later that year, the young family moved into a large house in a quiet neighborhood. Michelle's mother, Linda, came to visit to help with housework and noticed a tense atmosphere in the home. Jason had a bad temper and often started arguments. Michelle tried to downplay these incidents and appear cheerful. However, she confirmed with her mother the true state of their relationship, which seemed ominous. When Cassidy was just 2 years old, Michelle found out she was pregnant again. She was nervous about sharing the news with her husband, but he took it calmly and even seemed happy. The family decided to visit Jason's parents in Bravard to share the news in person. They spent the weekend celebrating with relatives, and on Monday they left Cassidy with the grandparents for a few hours and went out to dinner to celebrate the event. As they were driving home, Jason, who was driving, overturned and the car went off the road into a ravine. They were left very frightened with a few scrapes and bruises, but their lives were not in danger. However, Michelle had suffered a miscarriage, so Michelle was very worried. Jason was surprisingly calm about the accident. Before the accident, during a business trip, Jason met an old college friend, Michelle Money. She had the same name as Jason's wife, Michelle. Jason told his wife about it. They decided to invite Michelle Money to visit their home, and she agreed. During her visit, Michelle Money began to complain about her unhappy family life. At the same time, Michelle Money kept complimenting Jason and telling his wife that she was lucky to be pregnant. Michelle was not worried about Michelle Money's behavior, but she genuinely wanted to comfort her friend. Jason and Michelle Money began calling each other every day and secretly meeting each other. Jason always justified his absence with business trips, and his wife could not guess anything. Things got complicated in the summer of 2006 when Michelle found out she was pregnant. Unlike her previous pregnancies, Jason's reaction was unhappy and cold. Michelle attributed his sadness to her previous miscarriage, still not knowing the real reason for his cold behavior. In November, with Michelle 5 months pregnant, Jason embarked on a 300-mile business trip. Michelle, who was pregnant, had a lengthy phone conversation with her best friend, discussing family problems and a heated argument she had with her husband the previous night. After the call, her husband left. Jason embarked on a 300-mile business trip. Around 10 p.m., Jason arrived at a hotel, claiming fatigue from his journey. However, instead of resting, he began to carefully examine the hotel's entrances, exits, and security cameras, planning a way to leave and return undetected. He was creating a solid alibi for a crime he intended to commit. Early the next morning, Jason calls Meredith and asks for her help. He tells her that he wants to surprise his wife with a piece of jewelry for their anniversary, but accidentally sent the order confirmation to their home fax machine. Jason is worried that Michelle will see the gift and ruin the surprise. Even though Meredith doesn't like Jason, she agrees to help him. Meredith arrived at her sister's house, using a secret door in the garage that only family members knew about and that was always left unlocked. The house was unusually quiet, but Michelle's keys, wallet, and important papers were still in the hallway, suggesting she hadn't left the premises. When Meredith went upstairs, she found the bedroom door wide open, but neither Michelle nor her daughter responded to her calls. When she entered the room, Meredith was met with a horrific scene. Michelle lay on the floor by the bed, her skull fractured and her body surrounded by a large pool of blood. The walls, furniture, and floor were all stained with blood, and tiny footprints were visible next to the body. Sadly, Michelle had been dead for hours. As Meredith rushed to call 911, she heard a faint noise coming from under the bed. When she looked back, she saw Michelle's young daughter, Cassidy, looking at her with a confused expression. Cassidy was unharmed. The little girl had witnessed her mother's brutal death and had spent many hours by her side. A forensic examination of Michelle's body later revealed a series of bruises, abrasions, and broken bones. Her teeth had been broken, and her skull had been fractured by a heavy object. A bloody pillow was found next to her body, with marks suggesting she had been suffocated by the pillow. The murder investigation revealed some crucial facts. First, nothing was stolen from the house, indicating that the killer's sole intention was to murder the Michelle. Furthermore, there were no signs of forced entry or broken locks, suggesting that the perpetrator had a key or knew about a secret door that only family members were aware of. Normally, Jason would be the prime suspect, but in this case, Jason seemed to have a solid alibi. He claimed to have checked into the hotel and not left until the morning, then attended a business meeting. Hotel records confirmed that he used a key card to enter and exit the room. However, upon closer inspection, investigators discovered several irregularities in Jason's alibi. A hotel employee found the fire escape open and propped up with a rock. When investigators reviewed surveillance footage to determine who had propped up the rock, they discovered that the camera had been deliberately disabled on the night of the murder. Jason's room was last recorded about half an hour after he checked in. The strange events continued. Later that night, a man resembling Jason stopped at a gas station between the hotel and the crime scene. When asked to show identification as required by the station's rules, he refused, paid with cash, and hastily left without waiting for his change. The on-call attendant identified Jason, but he denied any involvement, claiming that he had spent the night in the hotel room. His actions, however, raised suspicion. On the day before the tragedy, Jason had made more than 24 calls to his wife, Michelle, and 5 more to his mistress, Michelle Money, each lasting less than 15 seconds, suggesting he was in a state of panic. Notably, these calls were made outside the hotel, contradicting his claim that he had been in the room all night. Additionally, Jason was late for a scheduled business meeting with his partners and appeared distracted. While these incidents were suspicious, they did not prove his guilt, so Jason was able to maintain his normal life for nearly 3 years. He even won custody of his young daughter, which was a huge blow to Michelle's family. Jason's case was reopened in 2012 with new evidence. Witnesses reported seeing his distinctive white car near his home on the night of the murders. A child psychologist testified about Jason's daughter, reenacting a disturbing scene with her doll, and Jason's former mistress, Michelle Money, revealed Jason's mood swings and violent outbursts, and that he had confided in her about his marital woes. Testimony helped convict Jason of brutally assaulting his pregnant wife, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As a result of Jason's actions, his daughter, Cassidy, was left without parents. Her mother was murdered, and her father is in prison for the crime. Cassidy is now being cared for by her aunt and maternal grandparents. The 4 young women all had similar profiles and all worked as sex workers at the time of their murders. The bodies were found packaged into various types of receptacles and dumped across the region. These women were all allegedly picked up from a stretch of Cherokee Street in St. Louis, Missouri, referred to by sex workers as the South Side Stroll. 19-year-old Robin J. Milhan had just given birth to her second child 2 weeks prior to her disappearance. Her brother Tom described her as a fun-loving young woman full of life. Unfortunately, she developed an addiction to crack cocaine like so many others during the 90s. She'd given birth to 2 children. The second child, the one she'd had just before her disappearance, was put up for adoption. The older child was living with her uncle, Tom Meehan, who was struggling with his own addiction to crack. Robin was a troubled kid caught in the cycle of poverty and addiction. She turned to sex work and frequented the Cherokee Street Stroll. That's also where she was reportedly last seen on March 22, 1990, by another sex worker. The police later confirmed that she was picked up from there and taken to the killer's residence where she was murdered. Her family reported her missing, and her body was discovered 4 days later around 60 miles northwest of St. Louis in a rural town. Her body was found wrapped between 2 mattresses held together by coat hangers on Highway E in Silex, Missouri. Her head was wrapped in a shirt which had sweat marks on it. There were also traces of dog hair, but DNA evidence couldn't be extracted at that time as the technology was still in its infancy. The investigators determined that she had been strangled. There was also a condom wrapper found with the body. Tom tries to block the dark memory and describes his sister as a good person. He says he just misses her now as he looks at her daughter, whom he raised. Brenda Jean Pruitt, 27, was the mother of a young child. She lived just a few blocks from the Cherokee Stroll. Brenda was reported missing by her family on May 9, 1990, just 48 days after Robin's disappearance was reported. For 10 months after her disappearance, there were no answers. Brenda had a troubled past, with multiple charges of burglary and suspected robbery against her in the same year and in 1985. She was found on October 4th of that same year. However, her body was so badly mutilated and decomposed that she remained unidentified for 5 months until March 5, 1991. A jogger on Boston Drive in Maryland Heights complained of a foul smell emanating from among the weeds. Workers searched the area and found the decomposing body in a 33-gallon plastic trash bin amidst other trash. Her murder was instantly linked to 2 already open cases, Robin Meehan and Donna Rietmeyer. Both women were sex workers, and the Major Crimes Division investigation moved in the direction of a serial killer targeting prostitutes in that area. Donna Rietmeyer, 40, was the mother of 3 young girls, ranging in age between 13 and their late 20s at the time. A known sex worker and addict, she was reported missing by her friend Sheila Leach. As per Leach's account, Rietmeyer and she had been dropped off at the Stroll together, and later Donna left to meet a client. They were supposed to meet up later that night, but Donna never showed up. Leach inquired about her at her house, but found that she hadn't been there either. Donna was reported a month after Brenda's disappearance, and like Brenda's, her body was found in a rubber trash can on June 11, 1990. Her daughters Juanita Zills and Rhonda Sullivan were just teenagers about the time and did not quite understand their mother's struggle with addiction. Both girls have very distant yet fond memories of their mother. They remember her as a kind and beautiful soul who was always loving to them and helpful to whomever she met. Donna had her first child when she was 15, and after was married to her 17-year-old high school boyfriend. She moved out after 2 years and started another family. Rhonda continued to live with her father. Zills was also brought up by her father and her mother's family from the age of 6. She describes her as a giving person. Zills has a similar account of some motherly advice on regular moisturizing when she once visited her in jail. They also remember her addiction. Zills had just reconnected with her mother before her death, and she was devastated with her passing. Dawn, her 3rd child, refused to speak out. A 4th disappearance of a young mother followed just 3 months later. Sandy Little, a 21-year-old mother of 1. Sandy had a tough childhood bouncing between foster homes, as her mother could not take care of her. She rebelled against any kind of authority and could not keep a job. Her aunt, Diane Little, got custody of Sandy when she was just 15 or 16. Her stepsister, Barb Stutt, remembers Sandy as a fun, loud, and extremely lively person. According to Diane, Sandy only spent a year with her before she fell into a bad crowd and started using drugs. When she turned to prostitution to support her habit, she had to move out. She disappeared for a bit, and when she came back on the radar, she had a baby. After she gave birth to her child, she lived with her boyfriend on top of an antique shop and worked the Stroll as a prostitute. The antique shop owner remembered her vividly and said she was a very sweet girl and that she would never have left her child. She went missing on September 4, 1990. Her body was found on February 17, 1991 by a driver on his way to work just west of Highway 79 on the shoulder of Interstate 70. Her remains were packed into a wooden drawer with a wool cap pulled over her face. Her body had to be identified by comparing the remains of an old X-ray of a fractured arm that she had sustained while alive. She was buried in an unmarked grave donated to the family because they could not afford to bury her. She remains in that unmarked grave to this day. This solidified the fact that the St. Louis police had a serial killer on their hands and that he or she lived in the St. Louis area. The FBI got involved in the case as early as June 1991 and confirmed the work of a serial killer. They profiled the package killer then as a sexual sadist who goes after younger women he can control. They also surmised that he would be a loner, divorced, working menial jobs, and with a poor work record. Joe Burgoon, a veteran St. Louis homicide sergeant, was one of the earliest investigators on the case. and he had observed the pattern where the killer dumped the bodies in the night, and also made a point to do so across police jurisdictions. There was to be one final victim that would finally put this killer away for life: Kenneth "Dog" Atchison. Atchison was a construction worker who was out of work due to bad arthritis. He started doing odd jobs around town. The killer hired him for a project at his home. Both men were regulars at the Overland Diner and knew each other well, even sharing meals together. The two were said to have had a small altercation over the dimensions of the materials purchased, and Atchison left without doing the job. This left the killer miffed. Later, he lured Atchison in with the sale of a Cadillac for an amount of $6,000. The family reported that Atchison, 57, left to meet his murderer at his Bell Ridge home on February 8, 1993, driving to it in his 1987 Chrysler. Atchison planned to exchange his Chrysler and the money for the Cadillac. His family later reported him missing. The police did not take the reporting seriously as they believed Atchison had fled with the money. The family, especially Atchison's brother Vernon, did some sleuthing of his own. They found the Chrysler being driven by a woman who had connections to the suspect. Also, the family time and again requested the Overland police to search the house he'd been headed to, but to no avail. 6 weeks later, Atchison's body was recovered from the basement of the house in a makeshift coffin. This was 2 years and 5 months after Little went missing. Each crime was followed by its own trail of reporting, finding, and identification, but the killer himself remained a mystery, hidden behind a nickname, the Package Killer. Even when the disappearance of Atchison happened, it could not in any way be connected back to the previous 4 homicides. Atchison's case was investigated as a solitary crime. Since the family found no cooperation with the Overland police, they got the St. Louis police involved. Overland Police Chief Eddie Williams maintains that the case was investigated as a suspicious disappearance, and they had questioned the suspect. They found minimal evidence for a search warrant. On March 25, 1993, the police got a tip-off from an informant which led to a search of the house. As Jones recounts, it was a 45-day ordeal, which ended in the recovery of her father's body in a makeshift coffin in the killer's basement. Ron Solanskis was a security guard at the Overland Diner the killer frequented. He later went on to testify that the killer approached him to move a box in his basement, but when he arrived there, he noticed Atchison's shoe sticking out. He left in a hurry and did not report this for the fear of being arrested for murder. The body of Atchison was later found in the box. He'd been strangled, battered, and finally shot. 3520 East Edgar Drive at Bell Ridge was home to Gary Muehlberg, and was also the place where he butchered all of his victims. One of 3 children, Muehlberg had a history of violence from a very young age. He was born in St. Louis, but his family moved to Kansas at some point. He married and had 1 child there. Later, in 1972, he was charged with kidnapping, battery, and rape. This was followed by a series of other offenses. As Weber, the chief investigator on this case, states, her effort to understand the killer took her down a very dark road. According to a report Weber pulled from Salina, Kansas, Muehlberg once tied up and gagged a 14-year-old babysitter while she was on the job. He apparently did this with an intention to rob the house, but left quite abruptly, leaving her bound and gagged. He did time in prison for this. Associates also described Muehlberg as a twice-divorced narcissist. He studied psychology at the Central Methodist University and also completed graduation at Central Missouri State. There was a brief phase of stability where he married again and moved back to St. Louis with his wife's family. The marriage eventually failed and 2 kids from the marriage passed away. The neighbors remember him as a nasty know-it-all who always gave out evil vibes. Some of them said they were surprised at the revelation and say they knew Atchison was not his only victim. There's one neighbor who remembers him standing through a fence as construction work was going on next door and giving the workers instructions. He behaved like he knew better than anyone else. Detective Sergeant Jodie Weber of O'Fallon Police Department reopened the case in 2008. In 2003, when Jodie Weber was a newbie detective, she heard stories about the Sandy Little case. Weber was very interested in solving cold cases, and she pored over this one and read about its connection to the 3 other cases. She saw the pictures and simply could not get them out of her head. She understood that none of the cases were DNA tested because such tools were not available to the police in the early 90s. A determined Weber traveled between the stations to collect evidence from the Meehan and Pruitt cases as well. Weber pulled evidence bags and sent them to Missouri Highway Patrol Lab for DNA testing. She was determined to find answers for the family. Unfortunately, in 2008, when the results came in, no match was found in the database. Weber had no intention of quitting, though. She and her fellow detectives interviewed and re-interviewed witnesses, families, and acquaintances. She once again sent the evidence to be DNA tested, and this time it was to the St. Charles County Crime Lab. The lab was eventually able to get a partial DNA profile off the condom found with the body of Robin Meehan. The profile was not substantial enough to be entered into the CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, but it was used to rule out suspects. Due to the backlog of cases in the lab, and also with priority given to newer cases, this took 14 years of patient waiting to resolve. Finally, after 32 years, there was a match. Gary Muehlberg. Weber searched through the history of the killer. She found everything fit in like a puzzle coming together. Muehlberg was serving life for Atchison's murder. The similarities between all the murders was startling. Atchison's body was found in a makeshift coffin just like the girls, whose bodies were all packaged. Muehlberg kept Atchison's body with him for around 6 weeks, and as it turns out, he'd also kept the bodies of the girls in the basement of his home before disposing of them. Weber, along with Mark Harvey, an investigator for the prosecutor's office of St. Charles County, finally came face to face with the killer in person. They showed him the crime scene pictures, to which he faked shock and disdain. He denied having anything to do with it at first. A month later, Weber, together with 4 prosecutors this time, met Muehlberg once again. At this time, they came to an agreement. There would be no change to his condition in jail. They would not seek the death penalty so long as he cooperated. She just wanted the truth. Muehlberg then confessed to all the crimes one by one. The second interview was pretty powerful, Weber said. She added, he said he's thought a lot about these cases. He said his remaining time in prison would be easier getting this off his chest. He admitted to being lost and said that he did not really understand why he did what he did during that dark phase of his life. Additionally, Muehlberg confessed to another murder of a still unidentified woman, whom he claims to have left in a metal barrel outside of a car wash. He has not been charged with that murder. When asked if he thought the prostitutes deserved such an end, he said that he had acquaintances with other prostitutes whom he had not killed. He simply couldn't explain why he chose those particular women. He was quoted as saying, "No matter how these victims choose to make a living, they should not have had their lives taken in such a dark way." Gary Muehlberg, now 73, remains in prison serving a life sentence and is suffering from kidney failure. As Robin Meehan's brother Tom put it, "What I'm most happy about is that the man has been incarcerated since 1993. The families are trying to find comfort in the fact that he was not able to harm anyone else since his incarceration." Why do you think it took 32 years for the dots to finally be connected? Was it because the women were all sex workers and drug addicts? Who was the unknown woman left at the car wash? Are there any more women who remain unknown or unfound? The case of Susan Wright. Susan Lucille Wright was born on April 24, 1976, in Houston, Texas, to parents Velma Sue and Jimmy Lawrence Wright. She was the eldest of 2 children and had a biological sister named Cindy. As a child, Susan was active, sociable, and creatively talented. During her school years, she developed a passion for dancing and aspired to become a choreographer. With her bright and attractive appearance, as well as her slender figure, she drew many admirers and being the center of attention. After completing high school, Susan tried but was unsuccessful in getting into college. To raise funds for her future education, she decided to take some time off. During this period, she found work as a dancer at a well-known nightclub, performing partially nude on stage. She decided to leave her job and use her savings to enroll in evening courses at a nursing school. To support herself and maintain her independence, Susan took a job as a waitress at a restaurant while pursuing her studies. However, she soon discovered that medicine was not her real passion and had trouble paying for her studies. Consequently, she stopped attending her classes to concentrate on her job. In the summer of 1997, 21-year-old Susan met her future husband, Jeffrey Andrew Wright, at the Galveston restaurant where she worked. He was immediately drawn to her beauty and radiant smile, becoming a regular customer and leaving generous tips. After some time, Jeffrey mustered the courage to ask Susan for her phone number. He would call her daily, sometimes multiple times a day, to arrange romantic dates and surprise her with small gestures, such as sending flowers with heartfelt notes to her workplace. In the evenings, he would meet her and walk her home. The man was 8 years older than Susan, but she didn't consider this a significant issue. He was charming, attentive, and caring, which quickly won her over. However, it soon became apparent that Jeffrey struggled with alcohol and substance abuse. He claimed to have overcome his addiction to drugs and promised to quit drinking entirely. Susan, being young and in love for the first time, believed him. She thought that their love could conquer any obstacle. Shortly after, Susan discovered she was pregnant and excitedly shared the news with Jeffrey. Although he seemed pleased about becoming a father, he didn't take any decisive action, such as proposing or suggesting they move in together. Confused by Jeffrey's behavior, Susan took matters into her own hands. She insisted that their child should be born within a married family, and Jeffrey agreed to her terms. By the time they officially got married, Susan was already 8 months pregnant. They chose to have a quiet, intimate wedding without guests or celebrations, rather than a grand ceremony. Around this time, they purchased a home in a quiet area of Harris County, Texas, and moved in a couple of weeks before the birth of their child. In December 1998, they welcomed their first child, a son named Bradley, and appeared to be the perfect family. In 2001, Susan became pregnant again, and in the spring of 2002, she gave birth to a daughter named Kay. The family had a small dog named Buck, a comfortable family car. Jeffrey worked at a local construction company, and after the children were born, Susan became a stay-at-home mom by mutual agreement. She took care of the kids and created a cozy home environment. The neighbors said that Mrs. Susan was a kind person, friendly, sociable, a caring mother, and a loving wife. However, it was later revealed that the reality of their family life was far from perfect. Her husband was extremely demanding in every aspect of their lives. Susan's days were filled with cleaning, doing laundry, and cooking. Jeffrey demanded freshly cooked meals every day, prohibiting her from preparing meals in advance or reheating leftovers. Maintaining a perfect and clean home was a challenging task, especially with 2 small children. Additionally, Jeffrey required his clothes to be washed almost daily, as he refused to wear the same item twice. If Susan failed to meet these expectations, she faced insults, humiliation, and even physical abuse. Moreover, Jeffrey was extremely frugal, providing Susan with a meager weekly allowance of $100 to cover all household expenses, including cooking, childcare, and maintenance. Susan had to keep track of every expense, giving receipts to her husband Jeffrey. However, Jeffrey's behavior was a bigger issue. Despite promising to quit drinking, he continued and started using drugs, downplaying it as light doping for work stress. The substances made him aggressive, causing him to harm Susan and their son. Jeffrey denied his behavior was a problem, claiming Susan knew about his substance use before marriage. His parents sympathized with Susan, but felt powerless to intervene. After moving in together, Jeffrey's behavior became increasingly aggressive, leading to physical, emotional, and intimate abuse. He initially apologized, but the violence became regular. Jeffrey would often go to the gym 3 times a week to practice boxing as a stress relief measure. He looked forward to sharing this activity with his son when the boy was older. On January 13, 2003, Jeffrey returned home from the gym agitated and on edge. As Susan prepared dinner, he attempted to teach their 5-year-old son some boxing moves, but lost control and struck the child, causing the boy to burst into tears. Susan pretended not to notice the incident, but it was the last straw for her. Following dinner, she put the kids to bed. Meanwhile, Jeffrey stayed in the bedroom where he continued to take drugs. There are different accounts of what happened next. According to Susan, when she went into the room, Jeffrey assaulted her, attempted to rape her, and tried to stab her with a knife. She claimed she fought back in self-defense after managing to take the knife from him. The events that followed are unclear, with different accounts of what happened. According to Susan, when she entered the bedroom, Jeffrey tried to attack her, sexually assault her, and kill her with a knife. However, she claimed she managed to grab the knife and defended herself, leading to a fight. Her story changed multiple times, but the version told in court, based on the investigation, was considered more believable. Susan decided to use her dance skills to distract her husband and lower his guard. Wearing a short silk robe over her bare body, she put on a seductive show for Jeffrey. She then suggested a role-playing game that involved tying him up, which he agreed to. Using 3 of Jeffrey's neckties, she bound his hands and one leg to the bed. She used the silk belt from her robe to secure his other leg. With Jeffrey immobilized, Susan created a makeshift gag using her underwear, pretending it was part of the intimate game. To set the mood, she lit candles and turned off the lights. Jeffrey was tied to the bed with a gag in his mouth, unable to move or speak. The room was dimly lit. Jeffrey poured hot wax from a candle onto Jeffrey's chest, which was painful but initially seemed like part of a game they were playing. However, when she poured wax onto his genital area, the pain became unbearable. Jeffrey tried to free himself and scream, but he couldn't. His wife, Susan, took a small sharp knife from the kitchen and began stabbing him repeatedly, starting at his groin and moving up his body, slashing his genitals, legs, abdomen, chest, arms, neck, and face. She began slowly, expressing her grievances with each stab, recounting the insults, humiliations, and abuse she had suffered. As she continued, Susan began to cry and stab faster. Experts later counted 193 shallow knife wounds on Jeffrey's body. Most of these wounds were not fatal, and Jeffrey was conscious for most of the ordeal. Susan's actions suggested she was in a state of extreme emotional distress. Her lawyers argued that she was in a state of affect, unable to stop even when Jeffrey showed no signs of life. She had not considered what she would do next or how she would handle the body. Shallow grave in the backyard. She sat next to her husband's body on the floor for hours. Eventually, she looked around the blood-covered bedroom and knew she had to act before dawn. She carefully checked outside through the window, ensuring the coast was clear. Her gaze landed on a shallow pit in the backyard that Jeffrey had dug for a fountain over the weekend. A plan formed instantly. This pit would become her despised husband's grave. To move the body, Susan used a garden wheelbarrow. This raised questions for investigators, as a petite woman was able to single-handedly lift and transport a man twice her weight out of the house. Suspicions of an accomplice arose, but were never confirmed. Under the cover of darkness, Susan discreetly relocated the body to the pit and covered it with a thin layer of soil. She then cleaned up, removing the blood-stained curtains and bed linen, placing them in trash bags and dispersing them in different bins. The blood-soaked mattress was flipped over as Susan was unsure how to properly clean it. She spent the remaining time until dawn scrubbing blood from the floor, walls, and carpet. Scrubbing the carpet is a big deal with a large stain that couldn't be removed. In an attempt to eliminate any evidence of the violent confrontation, Susan applied bleach to the affected area, hoping the chemicals would destroy any remaining traces. Susan made a distressing call to her husband's parents in Austin, Texas. She was emotional as she recounted the events. Her husband, under the influence, had physically assaulted her and their son, spilled bleach on the carpet, and then ended their relationship before leaving. Jeffrey's parents were shocked and concerned by the news. Although they were aware that their son had his flaws, they felt genuine sympathy for their daughter-in-law. However, when they learned that he had hit their grandchild, they immediately offered for Susan and the children to come and stay with them. Despite their willingness to help, the young mother declined their offer. She added that she planned to file a police report and reveal all the incidents that had occurred at their residence. 2 days later, Susan visited the police station as her husband's sudden disappearance raised increasing concerns and action was necessary. Susan reported that she and her children had been victims of domestic violence perpetrated by her husband and required protection. She successfully obtained a restraining order against her husband, preventing him from approaching her and the children, although she was already aware that he would never be able to come near them again. As evidence, Susan presented bruises and cuts on her arms, which she alleged were inflicted by her husband using keys when she attempted to defend herself. Additionally, Susan had a small bruise on his face and corroborated that his father had struck him. At first, the tearful woman's story seemed believable and logical. She claimed her husband, under the influence of alcohol and substances, had attacked her and their young son. Then, realizing what he had done, he became scared and fled. However, over time, suspicions grew because Jeffrey had not contacted anyone. He appeared to have run away without his belongings, documents, or mobile phone. He didn't show up for work or visit his parents, and none of his friends or neighbors had seen him. It was as if he had vanished. Susan found it unbearable to stay in the house where she confronted her husband. She couldn't shake the feeling he was still alive and would rise for revenge. She was losing her grip on reality. Even their dog, Buck, sensed it, constantly barking, trying to dig up the yard where Jeffrey was buried. On January 17th, Susan went to her mother's house with her children. When her mother saw her daughter in person, she fully realized the severity of the situation, even though she had already been aware of it. Velma directly asked if she had killed her husband, and her daughter broke down in tears, nodding in admission. The daughter then confessed to the crime, revealing the location of her husband's body, and repeatedly expressed uncertainty about what to do next. Following her mother's advice, Susan reached out to lawyer Neil Davis the next day and confessed to killing her husband and attempting to cover up the crime. After gathering all the details, the experienced defense attorney considered possible scenarios and contacted the Harris County District Attorney's Office on January 19th. Davis reported Susan's confession, including the burial of her husband's body in their backyard, and stated that she was willing to provide a full statement at the police station. On January 24, 2003, Susan voluntarily went to the police station, intent on making a full confession. However, her account was disjointed with confusing details and occasional contradictions. She sometimes referred to her late husband as if he were still alive, expressed fear of him, and requested protection. Consequently, Susan underwent a psychiatric evaluation. The results revealed she had suffered a nervous breakdown and was experiencing depression. Despite this, the evaluation found that Susan was still capable of understanding the actions she had taken. When investigators uncovered the remains of Jeffrey from the makeshift grave in the backyard, they were shocked by the brutality of the scene, having never encountered. Experts counted a total of 193 knife wounds on the victim's body, distributed across various areas, including the groin, legs, shoulders, arms, abdominal area, chest, neck, and face. The majority of these wounds were superficial, meaning they were not life-threatening on their own. However, one head wound was severe enough to have caused death. The large number of superficial wounds suggests that the victim endured a prolonged and agonizing death, likely while still conscious, as his wife repeatedly stabbed him with a small knife. The victim's wrists and ankles showed deep marks from the ties and belt used to bind him. These injuries indicated that the victim had attempted to free himself but was unsuccessful. The ties and belt were still on the body when it was found. Additionally, there were traces of candle wax on the victim's chest and groin area. Susan claimed that the candle wax was an accident, resulting from her husband knocking over a lit candle. However, the prosecution argued that the hot wax was more likely used as a form of torture to inflict suffering on the bound victim. Furthermore, the victim's mouth contained his wife's underwear, which acted as a gag to prevent him from screaming or calling for help. Toxicological tests showed the deceased had alcohol and several controlled substances in his system, which could have led to aggressive and irrational behavior. Initially, the bedroom where the confrontation occurred seemed normal, except for a large bleach stain on the carpet. However, upon closer inspection using special chemical agents and equipment, it became clear that Susan had spent considerable time cleaning up the scene. Once wiped away blood traces were revealed, the true extent of the violence became apparent. Blood was found throughout the room, including on the ceiling, and the mattress was saturated with it. The trial began in late February 2004, with Susan having already spent a year in custody. Her children were being cared for by her parents and sister Cindy. Her lawyer was well prepared, having worked extensively with Susan to build her case. During the trial, Susan frequently broke down in tears as she recounted the events of that horrific night and the abuse she suffered leading up to it. She claimed to have endured years of cruelty and violence at the hands of her husband. The defendant, Susan, claimed that on the evening of the incident, her husband returned home from training in an agitated state. He began demonstrating boxing techniques to their 5-year-old son, Bradley, and said the boy would also take up boxing. When Bradley refused, his father hit him in the face. Susan put the children to bed and then tried to have a serious talk with her husband, urging him to seek help at a clinic. However, he became angry, grabbed his keys, and tried to leave. Susan attempted to stop him, which led to a struggle that caused injuries to her palms and wrists. According to Susan, her husband then struck her, causing her to fall and momentarily lose her bearings. After regaining composure, Susan saw her husband Jeffrey holding a knife, but her testimony became inconsistent. Her lawyer argued she was in a state of affect, leading her to seize the knife and strike Jeffrey. Susan claimed she secured him to a cart with ties and a belt after the confrontation, and candle wax accidentally landed on his body. However, the defendant had no explanation for why her underwear was found in the victim's mouth. In contrast, the prosecution presented a more convincing and logical case. Expert testimony revealed that the victim's wrist and ankle wounds were inflicted before death, likely as part of a ruse to restrain the victim. This also provided a plausible explanation for the gag in the victim's mouth. Additionally, the angle of the injuries suggested that the perpetrator was positioned on top of the victim rather than struggling with him, which would have resulted in different injury patterns. All the cuts on the victim were inflicted from the front, indicating that the attack occurred while he was lying on his back, unable to move. It was unclear whether Susan had planned her husband's murder in advance and intentionally used the pit he dug for a fountain as a makeshift grave. Prosecutors, however, suspected that she had carefully orchestrated the crime, motivated by the potential insurance payout. The case drew widespread media attention, with Susan being labeled the blue-eyed butcher or blonde meat grinder by the press. Jeffrey's family demanded the harshest possible sentence, while many of their neighbors felt sorry for Susan, recalling instances where she had bruises that she attributed to her own clumsiness, but which may have been signs of physical abuse. Prosecutors initially sought a life sentence for Susan, but later reduced their request to 45 years in prison. In March 2004, she was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years. She showed no emotion when the judge delivered the verdict, appearing detached from the proceedings. A year later, her lawyer's attempt to appeal the decision was rejected. In 2008, Susan and her defense team filed another appeal, which was influenced by new testimony from a previously unknown witness. Misty McHale, wife of former NFL champion Steve McHale, was a key witness. She had a lengthy relationship with Jeffrey Wright in the mid-1990s and was briefly engaged to him. However, she suffered physical abuse, humiliation, and cruel treatment from Jeffrey, leading her to end the engagement and cut ties. Following this new information in Jeffrey's testimony, Susan's prison sentence was reduced to 20 years. She became eligible for parole in 2014 at age 38 but was denied. A second denial followed in July 2017. After 16 years in prison, Susan Wright was released in the winter of 2020 at age 44. She was met by reporters and photographers, causing her to break down in tears and ask to be left alone. Her trial received extensive media coverage, including a broadcast on Court TV. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.